Watch Talk Heathen live Sundays at 1 p.m. Central. Visit tiny.cc/YTTH and call into the show at 512-991-9242 or connect to the show online at tiny.cc/callth.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to another fantastic episode of Truth Wanted. I'm your host tonight, Objectively Dan. This is the live call-in show that happens every single week, Fridays at 7 p.m. Central Time, where we talk to people about what they believe and why. And every single week, I always have a guest with me. This week is no different. It's Richard Gilliver, everybody. Richard, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much. I am so excited about being here.
I am so excited that you are here, Richard. So, Richard, you have been a volunteer with the ACA for a little bit now. You have been featured on several episodes of the nonprofits, and you also mod some of the Facebook groups that we do. So, yeah, just tell us about yourself. Who's the real Richard Gilliver? That's what I want.
Oh, that's a question. The real Richard Gilliver is a man who has many facets.
Yeah.
So we'll ignore most of them, and
Okay.
we'll stick with the kind of skepticism stuff. I've been talking to religious people and people who believe in ghosts and in UFO visits to Earth and things like that for about 28 years. I'm an old man, and as you can tell by the grey in my beard. And yeah, I love it, and I've been doing it on and off. I used to do it before the internet days by going and speaking to people in the street, talking to people who had like the religious stalls, or if I've met anyone outside of a church or handing Bibles out, just speaking to people like that, the good old-fashioned way. And then the internet came along, and in the old days, it was chat rooms. And so you'd nip into the like religious chat rooms on various forums and talk to people like that. And then I got married and took a bit of time off from doing it. I got a bit disillusioned with the kind of atheist movement in Britain. And then I was watching YouTube and I came across Matt Dillahunty and the Atheist Experience. So I kind of hunted out the Facebook group, interacted on that just as a regular member of the Facebook group. And then I started getting really into a show called Talk Heathen. And I had this little notion that there wasn't a Facebook group for Talk Heathen. So I contacted Tangel, right, who's the ACA volunteer coordinator. And I asked her if there was a Facebook group or any plans for a Facebook group. And she said, if you want to do it, then it's yours. And that's how I got into the volunteering. I became an admin for the Talk Heathen group. Originally, there was me, best name ever, and Tangel Wright. We had 3 members. And then over the next week, it went to 100, 200, and it began to grow. We sent a gift out to the 1,000th member. And I
didn't know about that. That's awesome.
Yeah. And then slowly, Tangel took some time off, so I kind of took over being the admin for all the Facebook groups. And now we've got a team of Tangel's come back. We've got a team of 4 admins now who kind of make all the decisions between us, and it's fantastic. It's a wonderful kind of little group. We've got some awesome volunteers. So I'm the complaints man. So if you ever have any complaints, it's me you come to. And it's good. It's a wonderful community. So yeah, I've been doing the ACA stuff behind the scenes for a long time now. So yeah.
And there's literally dozens of people that do stuff behind the scenes for the ACA. It's really, really awesome. When we thank the crew every single week at the end of the shows, we're not just blowing smoke. Like, everybody that works behind the scenes works so diligently and so hard to make all of our productions happen. So it's always really, really cool when we get to have conversations with folks who are typically more behind the scenes. Although, Richard, you have been more and more, in the public eye, I would say, especially with your debut tonight on, Truth Wanted. I should also point out as well that the groups that we're talking about are fan-run groups, meaning that they aren't officially ACA. They're not run by the board of directors or anything like that. There's no decisions there. They're totally fan-run groups that hosts like to make appearances on and have conversations with folks there and stuff. So it is an interesting dynamic for sure. So what do you think is the advantage now from talking to people on the street in the 90s versus talking to random strangers online in Facebook groups now? Is it worse? Is it better? What's the difference?
Oh, there's pros and cons to it. I will always default to talking to people in person. I prefer, for one thing, you get that emotional interaction that you can't get through typing messages. And whether it's people calling in this format that's coming, especially since the pandemic, and this has taken off more and more. And this is great, but you can't beat talking to people in person and just sitting there and having a respectful conversation with them. I love it. One thing the internet does have an advantage over when you're in the forums and the groups is that you can keep a track of conversations. And if somebody wants to gish gallop, that's for someone who doesn't know what that is, that's when they're trying to avoid being pinned down by just throwing fact after or idea. They're not usually facts. It's like claim after claim after claim after claim out, so you can't pin them down. One thing typing things out does allow you to do is, grab those things, screen grab those things or quote those things and go back to it and pin them down on a particular point.
Right. Yeah, there's definitely like some advantages and disadvantages that I've noticed. So one of them, of course, as you mentioned, being an advantage of talking in person is you get to build that rapport with somebody, right? You get to establish that face-to-face contact, that relationship. You can read body language in a way that you really just can't do on the internet, right? But a disadvantage of that also is if you're caught off guard with something, you have to respond right then and there to something that you may not be ready to answer to. So there's people, and I'm gonna throw out a name here, okay? Like Ray Comfort. Okay, Ray Comfort does this all the time. If you've ever seen videos of him, he's a Christian apologist who will talk to people and ask people, if they are bad people or if they're good people, and he'll ask them if they believe in sin and all this stuff. And obviously for folks like us, it's not a big deal, maybe because we literally have these conversations, if not every week, then every day, right? But if you're just a person on the street, you might be caught off guard by some of these arguments, and it may kind of confuse you in a way that you may not understand how to respond. Whereas on the internet, you have some time to kind of look into things, fully type out your response, but it also means you can be victim to kind of the gish gallop, right, that you're talking about, where somebody can just throw a whole paragraph of BS that makes it really hard to kind of counter all at once without like wasting your whole day away gathering sources and probably giving a response that's proper due sometimes. So shout out to the folks that do take the time to do that and are willing to have those conversations, because when you have those conversations out there online, then other people can read it and then maybe learn something from it. I know I've definitely learned a thing or two from these kinds of debates, but obviously there, like you said, there's advantages and disadvantages to that kind of discourse, right?
Yeah, definitely. And I think you brought up an interesting point about being caught off guard. And I think that's where skepticism comes in. That's where, practicing skepticism is really helpful there. Because I think if you watch people in these conversations with people like Ray Comfort, you tend to get three types of people. You get people who were just, they may have just never even thought about it. So being caught off guard is really takes them back and is a massive disadvantage for them. Or you get the people who have well-practiced arguments. They may be, let's say, for example, the fans of the ACA, and they listen to ObjectivelyDan speaking on Truth Wanted every week, and they hear what you say, but they don't really think about the arguments. They just repeat those arguments. And they can
Sure.
be caught off guard too, because if things are brought up that they've not heard Dan say on Truth Wanted, then they can get stuck as well. Whereas if you're a skeptic, it's very easy to be comfortable saying, I do not know, without feeling like you're caught off guard. And I think that comes across. I think there's a difference between standing there and going,
Right, definitely. Looks like Richard is going to be joining us back in just a second here. But I agree with his point in that you don't want to be caught off guard when you're having these conversations. And people who are really interested in talking about these kinds of subjects, they're going to be the ones who are going to be more researched on this stuff. They're going to be ones who might be familiar with some of the background topics that are discussed in these kinds of things. But for the average person, they may not be ready for that sort of thing, but it shouldn't matter, right? It really shouldn't matter if we're willing to just say, I don't know how to respond to that, or, I have to get back to you at a different time, right? That's an honest thing to say. But sometimes that's hard to do. That can take a little bit of humility when you're talking with somebody like that. So anyway, very difficult to have those kinds of conversations if you're going into it thinking you're going to come in and do a WWE super slam on your interlocutor, right? Obviously, I am an advocate for street epistemology, which means that you can be ignorant on a whole bunch of stuff and still are able to have great conversations with people, because you don't have to be an expert on these kinds of things. So while we are getting Richard back with us, I'm wondering, crew, if we can take a minute to thank our patron of the week. If we could get that graphic up, that would be awesome. Every single week, we always thank our patrons for patreon.com/truthwanted. You guys are the ones that help make the show happen every single week. Every single one of our hosts, none of them are paid by the ACA to do this stuff. They're all volunteers. So all the money that gets put towards these shows, it helps towards making these shows even better. So thank you guys so much for doing that. We're going to shout out our patron of the week this week, and it is Stefan Van Den Berg. Thank you so much, Stefan, for donating to Truth Wanted. I am just so amazed that I get to read so many new names every week of people who donate to this show. Obviously, I'm not the only host of this thing anymore, but it still makes me really happy to see that people are just so invested in this project and thinking that it's worth donating their money to. So thank you guys so much for doing that. It is so meaningful to me as a host, and also just as someone who has just seen this thing from the very beginning turn into what it is today. I'm so excited to see where it continues to go in the future. And we are still waiting on Richard to get back to us, but that doesn't mean that I can't take your calls now. So I think we should just go ahead and jump into some calls as we're waiting on Richard to come back with us. I'm going to look at our host queue and see who we can talk to. We got a couple of people who want to talk with us. I'm going to start with Kyle. Kyle, who's calling in from Indiana. Kyle, you've been waiting for a little bit now. How is it going, Kyle?
It's going really well, Dan. I'm sorry that Richard is having technical problems. I had some earlier. What I'm calling about, you guys are great. Love the show, how it deals with the supernatural and things that basically can't be explained. But there is this theory in science, the multiverse. I think you're familiar with it. And if there are infinite universes, and I assure you, I understand we're going down a rabbit hole here. How do we know that we're not in a universe that has gods or aliens or ghosts? Because there's something going on here. And being unexplained is different than realizing there's a problem. I think you would agree that there are many things out there that are still unexplained.
Sure. There's definitely things out there that are unexplained. But when we talk about what's unexplained, what scientists usually mean when they're talking about that is explained through natural law. In other words, they don't have mathematical or otherwise any kind of scientific description of understanding why things are operating in the natural world in the way that we observe them. The key here being, of course, natural, right? So if we're talking about the expansion of the universe, why is the universe expanding at a greater rate? Why is it continue to accelerate? That's something that we may not fully understand quite yet, but it's something that we observe the natural universe happening with. We don't necessarily call it a supernatural phenomenon in that sense, because at this point in time, we don't have a reason to. But it also begs the question, and this is something that's talked about in the atheist community a lot, what would it even mean to talk about the supernatural? Are we talking about something that's violating the law, or is it just something that we've yet to express in natural law, right? So there's a big distinction there. And the more that we seem to find things in the universe, the more we seem to be able to describe through natural means. And that doesn't mean that we may be able to explain everything through natural means, but I don't even know what a god or what a supernatural being would even look like at this point, to be honest. It almost seems nonsensical, because it seems like we're either able to explain it via natural means or we're not. And even if we're not, that doesn't mean that it can't be. It just may mean that we're simply not able. So it's a really hard thing. And that's why most atheists take the position that, yes, we don't know for sure that a God doesn't exist, right? That's a key thing. A lot of people miss that. But we do tend to say that we don't necessarily believe in one because we don't have good evidence to believe so at this time. That doesn't mean it can't change in the future. Now, there are definitely hard atheists that will say, yes, there's definitely no God that exists. And of course, I would disagree with that and saying, I don't know if I can even go that far. But specific variations of gods, like Yahweh, for example, the Christian God, I'm pretty sure about that one, if only for the fact that there's specific claims that are attached to that God that we can actually look at and see if they match up with reality, right? So anyway, I know that's kind of a long answer, and it looks like we got Richard back with us. Richard, hopefully you were able to hear the question. Did you have a response?
I missed the beginning of the question, so I wouldn't mind if Kyle just repeated the beginning of the question.
I think he asked me what I said in the beginning, but I'm getting feedback with him, or a delay.
Gotcha. Yeah. So I'll go ahead and explain. So basically, he's asking if multiverse is a real thing, then how do we know that there aren't universes, or that we aren't in a universe that could have ghosts or the supernatural, right? So that's kind of what we're looking at. Richard, you still there?
Yeah.
Okay. So we're still getting a little bit of technical difficulties here, but were you able to hear the question?
Yeah, just repeat. I just missed it again. Sorry.
Right. We'll do one. Let's see. So we are looking at, if the multiverse is real, then how do we know that ghosts and other kinds of supernatural aren't a part of that multiverse?
Right. Yeah. We don't. We don't. But the time to believe it is when they have.
I'm really interested in what Richard has to say. I just want to say, I've asked that question to a few people. Dan, you pretty much nailed it. I am very curious to what Richard has to say, but I sort of set him up.
Yeah.
Yes, the universe, we don't know. And just like lightning used to be thought as a vengeance of the god or whatever, as we learn more about the universe, these things that we see as supernatural may just be part of the way it is. We just haven't explained it yet. The problem with the multiverse, though, is as far as infinite universes, if I understand it correctly, that means that any possibility that's there is going to happen somewhere. The question then becomes, as an observer in that universe, how do you know if you're in that universe or not?
Why do you think that any possibility can happen anywhere? For example,
maybe you missed the beginning, Richard. I'm going off a rabbit hole that we say that there is a multiverse. And if that theory is correct, then this is where that rabbit hole leads me. Where does it lead you? And I'm very interested.
Why does it lead you there? Why would you, for example, think that in an infinite universe, which it may be subject to the laws of physics that we're learning to understand, and we will, hopefully understand more in the future. Why would you think that pertains that anything is possible? If souls aren't part of the human condition, why would that be in a different universe, in a multiverse? Souls suddenly become possible. In the multiverse, it may still be that the same laws apply. We're not. It's not just a get out card to say that anything can happen. There must be a reason why things can potentially happen. Just saying, well, there are infinite possibilities isn't a reason. It's just begging the question.
Interesting. You have a response, caller?
Right. Richard, thanks. If there was a multiverse and there was infinite universes, I tend not to use the word impossible without some very, very, very hard facts. Things have been called impossible for millennial. It was impossible to fly. It was impossible to go over 30 miles an hour. So possibilities, I think, are only limited by the human's imagination. If we can find a way to do it, we're going to. So to say that, and that's where I go with infinite possibilities. It's just something I was thinking about, something I talked to my friends about, and I thought I would call you guys and pose the same hypothetical situation. Dan nailed it to start with. I became speechless after his response. So,
well, one additional thing I might add to that, Kyle, and I appreciate you saying that, but I would say, when we're talking, my understanding of multiverse, right, and I am not a physicist in any sense of the word, but my understanding is that there is the possibility of different types of fundamentals in our cosmology that could exist. So like the behavior of gravity could be different in a different kind of multiverse, right? The behavior of electrons could be different in some kind of way. So those kinds of fundamentals could change, right? So if we're working with that understanding of the multiverse, then we're still talking about natural phenomenon, right? There wouldn't be necessarily anything supernatural about that if we even understand what supernatural means, right? It seems that we would still be able to describe things in a mathematical way or an otherwise scientific way. So I wouldn't know I still would know what it means, even in a multiverse, to say what a supernatural being is at that point. But yeah, that's really all my thoughts about it. I hope that was sufficient enough for you, Kyle.
Yeah, hey, Dan, thanks for taking my call. Richard, sorry we didn't get to talk more. I've followed you guys for a little bit now. Big fan. Appreciate your comments, and I'll let you take another caller. Thank you.
Thanks, Kyle. I appreciate it. And yeah, it's usually I will say this, when multiverse, specifically quantum stuff comes up, those are my least favorite conversations. That was actually pretty nice. That didn't go super off the rails, which I thought was pretty interesting. I know you missed a little bit of that, Richard, but yeah, did you have any follow-up thoughts?
Yeah, it's a very interesting area of study, and it's again, I'm not a physicist. I've got friends who understand the science far better than I have. And even my understanding of what a multiverse is has changed over the years. I had a friend who was really into cosmology who said that one idea about the multiverse is that not that kind of universes are stacked up on each other, which is kind of the traditional idea I had, but that with our own universe is that big that the multiverse is the parts of our own universe that we have no access to. There are parts of our universe we will never be able to see because they're just that distant from us. And that's one concept of the multiverse. So just even thinking about the multiverse is a very interesting thing to do in itself.
Yeah. The terms, if you don't define them super concretely, and even now we're using it very, very loosely, it becomes a very nebulous conversation. And this kind of conversation also reveals a lot about one's epistemology in the sense of how they understand the universe to work. And what I mean by that is, do they understand the logic to be an a priori thing that the universe relies on? In other words, do they think the universe is somehow inherently logical, inherently bound to mathematics, or is it possible that it's beyond a kind of description and function like that? So far, we've seemed to be able to describe the universe in mathematical terms, and philosophically speaking, we may not ever be able to completely say why that is, which is really, really crazy. And it's a thing apologists point out too. They're like, right? They're like, well, you can describe things in math because God made logic and all kinds of stuff. And it gets really into some weird territory there. But I'm glad that there's people who are smarter than I am, who are reading up on the literature of this every day so that they can actually figure out the answers to this stuff. And they don't have to like listen to, dopes like me on call-in shows trying to make guesses at what we're talking about, right? So anyway, let's go ahead and get to our next caller. We're going to talk to Peter, who's calling in from Canada. Peter, you are live on Truth Wanted. What's up?
Yes, I want to talk to you about abortion. Before I start, I'd like to know, what is your position about? How do you feel about it?
What is my position about abortion? I am pro-choice, broadly pro-choice. I do believe that for most extenuating circumstances, it is appropriate for a woman to, have that procedure done. Obviously there's very rare circumstances where it might not be the appropriate action, but for, most cases in when somebody wants to have that done, it's entirely appropriate to do so.
Okay, so
Richard,
I'm going to
did you want to say your point too, or?
I agree.
Okay.
I agree with you.
Okay, there you go.
Okay, so
Yeah, Peter?
I just want to tell you right now that I am pro-choice. And I think that that abortion should be illegal before 15 weeks or illegal in general.
Okay, so
yeah,
cool. So you think abortion should be legal within 15? Sorry, did I hear that right? Within 15 weeks?
Before 15 weeks or before even 6 weeks, because at that point it's a human being with a heartbeat, and at that point you're committing murder.
Okay, so you do have a hard cutoff point. After you said, I'm sorry, it's a little hard to hear. Did you say after 6 weeks, it's a human being?
Up until 6 weeks.
Okay, so 6 weeks is your cutoff point, and your cutoff point is because it has a heartbeat and it's a human being.
That is correct. Yeah.
Okay. So, in other words, if it didn't have a heartbeat, it wouldn't be a human being. And if it does have a heartbeat, it becomes a human being.
Yes. Plus, it's also, it's not fully aware yet, but it has some sense of awareness. Like, for instance, a newborn baby, a fetus can know when it's hungry, when it's thirsty, and it kicks the mother to know, like, okay, it's time to feed me. Like, it's alive.
Okay, so awareness is also is pretty much that criteria, is what you're saying.
If you're aware, I didn't hear that.
Okay, gotcha. So this is an interesting belief. Richard, do you want to ask any questions about this?
I'm interested that and let's take a complete stranger. I don't know what kind of person you are, but let's just assume that it was somebody you didn't like. If somebody you didn't like needed a life-saving lung transplant, and you had to get, I don't even know if this is possible, but I'm not a medical doctor, so let's just bear with me for the sake of conversation. If you were forced to give one of your lungs to that person to save their life, how would you feel about that?
The two scenarios are not comparable. It's not at all.
Why?
Thing, I did not.
Why aren't they comparable?
Need to transplant because I did not put the person who needs to transplant in that situation, nor did I create them. A baby is inside a woman's womb, and she created it, and she had a choice.
Do you think women have? Do you think those who have wombs have always had the intention to create another life?
Well, they may not have created another life, but they were aware that it could happen. They assumed the risk. Why should
You
it be?
think
What
they're
about a
all
rape
aware?
victim?
You think in every time they're aware that it could happen?
You really think there's a woman on Earth who doesn't know that sex can lead to pregnancy? Do you really think there's a woman who does not know?
Yes, I 100% do. Yes, because
Okay,
sex education, Peter, is a privilege that many, many, many people in this world do not have. And the kind of consequences that happen with sex are not fully known to a lot of young teenagers. And that's unfortunate. And it shouldn't be the case, but it is the case. And so those situations happen every single day.
Mankind has been having children since long before sex education came into existence. People know how babies are coming to it. People know.
No, a lot of Peter. There are cultures right now on this earth. Did you know that believe that when a woman wants to get pregnant or they want to conceive, that they take all of the men in that particular village to insert their sperm so that they all get people from the village to create that child. In other words, there's cultural beliefs about sex all over the place that don't match our understanding of it. Okay, I'm just bringing you one specific example, but like worldwide, this idea that we have about our comprehensive sex education is not shared universally amongst all humans. So I have to reject that, and historically, that has never been the case either.
Well, I'm not talking about the whole world. I'm talking about the United States. And in the United States,
okay, there's definitely people in the United States that don't understand the full implications of how sex work. There are some people in the United States that think that if you have a condom, then you're 100% completely safe no matter what. There are some people in the United States who think that if you take a pill, that you're 100% safe no matter what. There are people who don't fully understand the consequences of these actions. And again, it happens every single day.
And I'm not in the United States, and neither are you.
How is how is abortion the solution? Tell me. How is abortion the solution?
How is abortion the solution?
Yes.
Abortions prevent unwanted pregnancies. In other words, they stop situations where people who can't necessarily care for that child, are able to care for them. They prevent a life from suffering, a life that would otherwise not grow up in the best of circumstances and not have the appropriate attention. Peter, if you please, I'll let you speak, but you can't interrupt me. Okay. Now, I've already lost my train of thought, but you can go ahead.
Oh, okay. So, I want to see how the child should suffer for the choices of the parents. Plus, the women who are choosing to abort their babies are doing so because out of convenience or it's an inconvenience for them. It's not because they can't afford it. They can't afford it.
I think you're assuming motives. I think you're assuming motives about people. Yeah,
yes,
and I don't think you can. I don't think you have the grounds to do that.
Yes, I do. I know exactly how it works.
Okay. Well, I'm glad you know the truth, Peter. I'm glad you know the truth of every single person with a womb who's ever gotten pregnant, because I sure as hell don't, and I would never go so far as to claim that I do. I would also add that, we obviously have a different idea of suffering in the sense of what capacity a fetus is actually suffering, in its development. I personally don't think at 6 weeks. That's what. Peter, I let you know, Peter. Peter, I'm going to mute you, Peter. I said that I would let you speak. I would let you speak, but you cannot interrupt me. You cannot interrupt me. This isn't that kind of show. Okay. Well, we'll let you go back to this, but yeah, we obviously have different conceptions of what's actually suffering, and that's going to cause an impasse, because what you believe is happening at 6 weeks and what I believe is happening at 6 weeks is not the same. And unless that gets resolved, we're probably going to have very different ideas about what's right and what's wrong in these situations. Go ahead, Peter.
Well, like I said, I agree with you that we do have different definitions. However, I just want to point out that the people who are pro-choice or people who are proportioning that at the highest levels, they have an agenda, which is to A, eliminate black people, and B, we as humans do not have the right to decide who lives and who dies. And plus,
So you think because I'm pro-choice, Peter, I have an agenda to eliminate black people?
not you personally, but the people.
Oh,
in Washington.
not me. Oh, but somebody out there has the agenda, even though I'm out here giving a pro-choice opinion on a podcast that goes out to, several thousand people.
Well,
right?
That's because you've been brainwashed. I have no argument with you.
Oh, I've just been brainwashed.
Peter, who is it who's controlling and brainwashing us to have these ideas?
I would love to know that too.
The Democratic Party.
Okay,
Peter, I'm pro-choice and I'm in Britain and we don't have a Democrat Party.
Well, your version of it.
Our version of it.
Our version of it. They got connections, They go overseas.
Clearly.
Yeah. Well, Peter, I don't know how interested I am in continuing this conversation. I'll be honest with you, especially if you're going to keep interrupting me while I'm talking. But, this has now gotten to the level of assuming the motivations of women who are pregnant, people with wombs who are pregnant, something which you have absolutely no right to do. And you clearly have no knowledge of. And I'll be honest with you, Peter. I'm going to make the assumption about you that you have never actually known somebody who's going through that decision, because I think you would have a lot more empathy for people's situations. There's a myriad of reasons why people are going to choose to have an abortion, and it's none of your goddamn business. But it's also something that I think you should take into a wider consideration, other than they want to eliminate black people, because that is silly, absolutely silly. Even if you just think that's a small minority of elites who are doing that, it's absolutely nonsense, and there's no evidence to suggest that you should have that kind of belief. That kind of thinking is going to really diminish your ability to relate to other people and convince them that what they're doing is wrong. Because again, several times you decide to make assumptions about people and their actions, and that's never good to do. So as a personal advice to you, Peter, I would say actually talk to people who have made this decision and see what motivating factors are happening there, and really try to just honestly empathize, because it's not something that you're probably going to ever have to go through. It's not something I'm ever going to have to go through. It's not something Richard's going to have to go through. And so I think we as people who don't have wombs and who can't actually do that for themselves should probably learn to listen before we speak about this kind of stuff. And that's really all I have the patience for as far as this conversation. I don't know if I want to continue with that, but Richard, do you have any other thoughts with that?
So many rabbit holes were opened.
Yeah.
It's just when we were talking pre-show before I disappeared about gish galloping, that's a perfect example of it. When one idea is challenged, just jump onto the next thing and the next thing. You give a perfectly reasonable response to the question, so then he jumps onto, well, it's black people. Well, we're being controlled. Well, you're brainwashed, and it's just one thing after another, and that's a perfect example of what a gish gallop is. Right.
What I wish could have happened was I wish I could have continued with an SC approach and continued to ask about this definition of life, of human life, because that's an interesting thing. I think a lot of people have ideas about that they may not have fully explored. I think it's still open to debate, honestly, of what it really means to say when a human being starts to become a human, or if that's even a meaningful or coherent concept. Obviously, we have, I tend to go towards like viability outside of the womb, right? That's what I talk about. But even then, it's not a bulletproof argument, right? Because like that can vary from person to person too. So it's difficult. And I don't know if all the answers are there when it comes to that side of the argument. But when we're talking about suffering in a fetus, we might be able to explore that a bit more. I personally don't think a heartbeat is what makes someone a human.
No.
At that point, I don't think that's a good definition. But
it was kind of treating it like every woman chooses to get pregnant, and then they're just completely wrong. So there are no circumstances that lead into so every situation is exactly the same, and that's just not the case.
Right. Or like when people even understand or realize that they're pregnant. I mean, Peter maybe comes from from Canada where sex ed is better. Sex ed is not great in the country that I live in. And while I couldn't tell you, stories from my personal life, anecdotes of people, I can tell you that there are lots of stories out there to read from people who didn't understand the full implications of sex. And maybe that sounds silly, but it's a real thing. And you have to understand that that's how people are coming into this. So this idea of, oh, well, they knew exactly what they were doing. No, they didn't. And especially in the cases of victims of sexual assault, right? There's no intention there whatsoever for pregnancy, but it does happen. So anyway, that's a topic I wish we could have had a better conversation with, but we got into some weird territory there. So let's go ahead and go to our next call then. I want to talk to Starman, who's calling in from Arizona. Starman, you're live on Truth Wanted. What's up?
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you just fine. How are you doing? Yeah.
Hey, good evening. I subscribed to your channel a while back, and I was listening to some of your stuff. It seems like you guys are somewhat kind of rationalist, objectivist. Is that right?
That's interesting you say that. I don't know if I'd call myself a rationalist or an objectivist in the strict philosophical sense of those words, because that has a lot to do with how you understand logic in your epistemology, whether or not you think logic exists like as a foundation to everything, or if like your reason should come from evidence, physical evidence, like how you interpret it, like that. I wouldn't know what to call myself exactly in those terms. I would say that we try to be skeptical, we try to be rational, but that's a long that's a long answer to your question.
Okay. Yeah, the reason I called in because I thought you might be interested in the discussion of the process of cryonics, which is the freezing of a dead person's brain in order to revive them in a distant future. Have you heard of it?
Oh yeah. We've talked about it here on the show. Actually, we've talked to at least one person who is already. We had a caller one time who said that they were ready to do it, and they were getting the paperwork done for it and everything, which is really interesting.
Yes, I'm signed up to do that as well.
Oh, okay, cool. Okay, so what was your decision-making tree there?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I tell you the truth, I'm not sure that. I think more or less a person who signs up for Cryonics has really gone on a life journey, and that journey takes them to a psychological, location or a place that makes them kind of eligible to sign up for Cryonics. And very few people are really kind of psychologically eligible, in my opinion, to sign up for it. And I think, so I'm kind of like in a place, that maybe is very different from the average person. And so that's why I was, I saw the logic in Cryonics, the rationale.
Tell me about that, what you mean by somebody has to be psychologically ready. Because I don't think that's something I've really heard talked about.
That's a very good point. But see, the thing is that I've been reading a lot lately. 25 years ago when I signed up, I started to notice that the idea of cryonics kind of bounces off people's heads. And I didn't see that non-chronicists were really addressing or coming to grips with the real arguments for cryonics. And so I started reading into like anthropology, sociology, and I finally got into terror management theory, and existential psychology. And this is basically a kind of academic school of thought. Have you heard of it?
I don't think I have. Have you, Richard?
Theory?
I've come across a little bit. I'm not entirely sure how academic it is. It may be fringe academia, I think, would be the best way to refer to it from my understanding. But if you want to give us a little bit more information, Starman.
Well, it's not just terror management theory, but generally in the social sciences and in psychology and sociology, the idea is kind of taken for granted that every culture has a worldview, okay, and sometimes there are fringe worldviews, okay, and Cryonics is one of those fringe worldviews. But the thing is that a lot of people, not a lot of people, some people are become alienated from this worldview. They reject this worldview and they turn to find another worldview. Some of these types of people are cultists, and some of them are chronicists. And so what I'm saying is that, I and other chronicists have, or more or less, rejected the mainstream cultural worldview, and we found another. And so that's kind of that's what I mean by we're kind of in a psychological place where we don't observe the death practices, taboos that our culture observes.
Starman, do you mind me asking you a question? Why do you think Cryonics is a worldview? I'd never. I mean, I'm familiar with it. I'm not an expert in it, but I'm familiar with it. I'd never consider it a worldview. Why would you go to the extent of calling it a worldview?
I'm not sure that I would call Cryonics a worldview. It's just that Cryonics has its own subculture, and it's different from the mainstream subculture. And every culture and subculture has a worldview. Okay, how we perceive the world to be, and my thinking is that when I talk to people about Cryonics, they don't really like to talk about it, and they don't have any curiosity about it. And I find that curious, okay? And I find it odd, and I want to know why. Because, and one of the things that terror management theory tells us, and terror management theory is not a fringe group. Terror management theory is based on the Pulitzer Prize-winning book from the 70s by Ernest Becker called The Denial of Death. And so it's the people who are the leaders in that academic school of thought of terror management theory are PhDs and professors at colleges, okay? And so it's not by any means a fringe worldview. But anyway, and so what I'm saying is that, for example, let's talk about taboos, okay? And every society has taboos. And the thing is, it seems that what terror management theory tells us is that the fear of death is a central aspect of all human cultures, although the actual fear of death is submerged, okay, and we don't think about it much because we are evolved to have an unconscious mind that suppresses the fear of death, okay, and we have tools that help us suppress the fear of death, and some of those tools are religion, okay, an afterlife scenario, our culture, okay, and the things like the Constitution and the military and the police and everything. These things help us. Help psychologically stabilize us, and but the thing is, chronicists and other people too have rejected this worldview, and so they are not bound by the same taboos that society is bound by, and so we are able to rationally evaluate Cryonics objectively. Okay,
without
you guys, go ahead.
I don't mean to interrupt you, but without knowing the history of this this field of study and its legitimacy within academia, I mean, I can see that what you're saying seems to be reasonable in some case, right? I think it's. I mean, like when you think about human cultures, like everybody has ideas about death, right? And how humans should approach death, what that should look like. I mean, I'm reminded recently of Switzerland, where they have that machine that's been approved for people who want to take their own lives. I think I don't know the specifics of it. I could be wrong. I believe it's been approved for public use was the result of these machines. So I think that's fascinating. The cultural implications behind that, people having their own autonomy over their own mortality and what that looks like for a rational person, that obviously has a lot of taboos carrying over it, because there are some people that think you can't go to heaven if you take your own life, these kinds of things. So maybe cryogenics comes down to, or cryonics comes down to, this idea that if we are masters of our own mortality, then there's something that's taboo about that, because that's typically dealt in the realm of God or dealt in the realm of who is ever in control of the afterlife and stuff like that. So I can see why people would have that aversion naturally. I think it does kind of come down to some philosophically interesting questions that people may not be equipped or interested to talk about. Richard, you look like you want to say something too.
Yeah, I'm really interested because you keep saying words like worldview, and you mentioned things like
that's curious. Yeah,
we're predisposed evolutionarily to kind of these things, and I think you might be looking at this in a little bit of a black and white way, because I've certainly no like major problem with cryonics. I don't think I'm averse to it in any massive way. I don't know all the specifics about it, but it doesn't seem like something that I'm massively averse to. And there are lots of different cultures. There are lots of different ideas about death and the way we approach death. There are a lot of religious ideas. I don't think something's. I don't think we can say something's were this way because of evolution when there's such a wide, vastly wide array of ideas about it. Yeah. You seem to be looking at it a very narrow black and white view within this what you seem to call a worldview, and I'm interested in your take on that. There seems to be some divorce going off between the things that you're speaking about. So I'm interested in you on that.
Good question.
Yeah, that is a good question. I mean, and I kind of agree with you in that I don't think that terror management theory and the people who write on that in that field can be completely correct in their theories, because this is such an unknown area that it's hard to say that anything is completely correct. But here's what Ernest Becker in his prize-winning book Denial of Death noted. Okay, he was a cultural anthropologist. He noted that virtually every single human culture since that we've ever known of has an afterlife scenario, okay, and that they all have cultural rules and mores and values and such that they feel they have to live up to, okay, and but let me read you something that I did a blog recently, and I'll read you some of the and we're kind of getting away from Cryonics there, but this is an interesting area as well.
So I want to, we have some other callers we want to get to. We do want to wrap up this call here in a bit. So, like, if we could just stick to just answering the questions from either myself or Richard, just getting to that, I think would be helpful.
Okay. I'm sorry. What was the question again? I mean, am I too black and white and tunnel vision? Yeah, that's a fair point. I mean, but I'm just, the thing is that this is this area here of the unconscious and death taboos, and why people don't investigate cryonics, such as you guys. Why you haven't investigated it?
I don't think cryogenically freezing my body is. I mean, you described it as the rational position, but I can think of other reasons why I wouldn't want to do it. For example, I've always wanted to donate my organs after I pass away and have it be used for other people. That's something that could be used in the here and now rather than later on in the future. I mean, not to say that people who are cryogenically frozen can't have their organs donated afterwards, I suppose. But, I think there could be reasons why somebody wouldn't want to necessarily undergo something like that.
Why don't you donate them now?
Well, then I can't be alive if I donate all of them, but maybe some of them, right?
In other words, what I'm saying is that that's kind of a rationalization. In other words, if you knew that cryonics would work, okay, I mean, and then you donated your organs, you're more or less ending your life because you're foreclosing.
Well, I think you missed my point, right? I think I would want my body to expire at some point. I wouldn't want to necessarily have it stored somewhere, indefinitely. Or and maybe this too, right? Let's say that I have some sort of condition that does make me not want to continue living at some point. And maybe with cryonics, the hope is that it could be fixed in the future. But maybe, there's something that psychologically that wants to prevent me from continuing to live my life in some sort of way. I don't know. I don't know if there would be a response to that.
I think the most interesting thing about cryonics for me is just the fact that you get to see the future. I've lived quite a long time, and when I was young, the things like the internet and cell phones and all this stuff that we've got now, this still seems futuristic to me. I think it's fascinating, and going into the distant future and seeing what that holds is fascinating.
Yeah,
I don't think there's anything wrong with it, and I think there's nothing wrong with Starman's position. I don't think there's anything wrong with Starman's position. I think the only difficulty I've got, Starman, is that you seem to be kind of I don't know how to use it, because I don't want to use the word cult. That's not what I'm saying, but you seem to have that kind of tunnel vision where it's either, if you don't think like this, then maybe you're not thinking correctly. And I think you should widen that vision and allow the other people have different ideas. Like Dan was talking about donating his organs, and that's a perfectly rational position to be in. I don't think anything other than cryonics is irrational. It's a very interesting subject. I'd love for you to call back and let's talk about this subject again, because it is really, really interesting. But I think you've got tunnel vision on it. That's the way you're coming across to me, and I don't mean that disrespectfully.
Are there religious ideas or rational ideas that would prevent people from choosing that option? Absolutely. In that case, I would totally agree with you, Starman. But I would still hold the position that there may be rational reasons why somebody would not want to, that have nothing to do with religion, and that maybe have nothing to do with terror management, nothing to do with necessarily a fear of death, but perhaps some other kinds of motivations that would prevent somebody from making that decision. But anyway, Starman, I know you probably want to respond. Unfortunately, we want to go ahead and take some other callers tonight as we continue on. So thank you so much for your call, and hopefully that spurs discussion in the comments and stuff too. Like I said, this is a topic we've talked about before, but it's never not interesting, I suppose. It's definitely a fringe idea, but maybe it will become more mainstream as the years go on. I wouldn't doubt that it would. But before we go on to our other callers, we have a special promo that we want to show you. So check it out.
We're all just told, bottle it up. Like, keep it inside. Don't even masturbate for that matter. Like, just take all those hormones and just repress them.
Yeah,
and then
you'll
by
go
the time
blind and get hairy palms.
It's always easier to it's easier to throw out bullshit than to deconstruct it, right? Like somebody could throw bullshit out for 2 minutes and it could take an hour to explain why that's wrong.
Penguins actually have prostitution. Yep. They will swap stones for sex. Stones to protect the young for sex.
Have you demonstrated that it's not just a book? Because to me, it seems that nobody's like, this is like saying I have an idea of a unicorn in my head and I'm going, have you demonstrated inside your head that there's a unicorn? No.
Dan has asked me to make it very clear that I am not, in fact, his father. It was one of the most disturbing things that evidently has ever happened to him.
So I just want to point out, I never actually asked Matt to do that. He decided to do that out of his own volition. However, it is still just as much appreciated that he clarifies that he is not my dad. So thank you for that, Matt. Thank you for making that clear to the world. So anyway, Richard, you got to talk about some interesting penguin activities. So that's cool.
Yeah, I had no idea I was on that promo reel till just now, so that was that was very interesting.
Don't you love the promo reels? They're great. They're like my favorite thing.
Yeah,
I love our promo reels.
I think some of the hosts have like a little competition to see if they can get on there as well. To see.
There are some things I've said personally that I'm surprised haven't made that reel, and then there's things I wouldn't expect to have made it on that you make it on. It's kind of a give and take, It's definitely a give and take. But anyway, we do have some more calls that we want to get to. We're going to talk to Mark, who's calling in from Pennsylvania. Mark, you're live on Truth Wanted. What's up?
Hey, I find that the topic I wanted to bring up sort of dovetails with the gentleman that came before me. And I am an atheist. And without a God, because I believe in there's no magic or supernatural beings, there's no afterlife. Would many people, if they got to take a peek at like what's headed their way, might opt out and say, you know what, with all the sunsets and the smells of flowers and good friendships, and I will admit that this is definitely tinged by the fact that I'm watching my mom pass away from dementia over the course of the last year in a nursing home, that it's like, if this is how it ends, we don't fall asleep and die, that maybe this isn't worth it. That if there is, as I believe, I've seen no evidence of an afterlife, that it's like, would a lot of people say, you know what, I'll forgo the good days because there's just so many bad days? Do you think a lot of people might opt out of this existence?
What an interesting question, Mark. I don't think a lot of people would. I certainly think some people would. I think just because, there's 7 billion people on Earth right now, let alone everybody that's ever existed in human history, or even up to the point where we're calling people humans and not something else. I think this thought has probably crossed some people's minds. And I think some people would say yes to that, which is morbid, but I think it's just simply true. Now, of course,
the year that will not be named didn't help.
Yeah, sure. It's a catch-22, isn't it, Mark? It's a catch-22 because it's a catch-22 because we have to be alive, and we have to have experiences, and we have to have judgments and opinions in order to come to a decision on whether or not it would be worth it. And you can't have that without being alive, right? So that's the problem with, at least for us who. So I'll let you talk in just a second, Mark. But as us, for those of us who are atheists, those of us who more or less believe in like a material reality. Like, I have to believe that my experiences are the culmination of that material reality. In other words, I am what I am, like, completely made up of physically. And so there's no soul like that was here before me that could have like made a decision like that. So it kind of doesn't even matter, right? Because this is just a decision that nobody can ever really make for themselves before they're alive. Now, whether or not somebody wants to end their life while they are alive is a philosophically interesting question as well. I, for one, happen to be in support of those who are at the end of their life and wish it to be make that decision for themselves as autonomously and as rationally as possible, should be able to do that. Now, of course, that involves very specific circumstances, and it's an interesting history to read about how countries have handled it. For some countries, you have to go through panels where you have to get checked off. You have to get the approval of a psychologist. For some countries, you can't do it at all. There's no access to it. So how different countries have handled this issue is from like a legal perspective and just quite simply a moral perspective is really, really interesting. Of course, I'll never say that I have all the answers, but I do think there might be circumstances in which that might be appropriate. But Richard, what do you think?
I first of all, I sympathize with you, Mark. I really do, because I watched my dad die of cancer.
Yeah.
And he went from being a 60-year-old who looked like a 50-year-old to a 60-year-old who looked like an 80-year-old within the space of a couple of months.
Yeah.
And it was in a lot of pain before he died, a lot of pain. And, so I do sympathize. I've been through it myself. And it is difficult, and it does make you think about mortality and things like that. But I think, speaking to the wider question that you asked, would people, if they knew the future, elect to leave this life? There are a lot of people in this world, who are in situations that are no fault of their own, where they are suffering every day. Some of them are born into it. Some of them trafficked into it. Some of them, people have real suffering and pain and hardship every single day of their life. And I'm sure a lot of them would elect to, without even seeing the future, just from the present circumstances, elect to give up if they had that choice.
Yeah.
It's a difficult question. It's an interesting question. As far as end of life care goes, I'd pretty much agree with what Dan said. People should be allowed to make that decision at the end of their life. But yeah, it's a wide subject. It's an interesting subject, and when you're faced with mortality, of course, this is when we think about it.
Yeah.
But what are your thoughts on that, Mark?
Well, I definitely agree with you. I mean, with 7 billion people on the face of the earth and so many different cultures, there are multiple ways that people deal with this. And I agree. This is not a shot at you, Dan, but you're 25 or 26. I don't wish anything but the best for you in life. But you're slowly going to start having experiences that, like, wow, this is awful. And at 58, losing friends suddenly. I go to the doctor. He's like, your blood pressure's fine. This is fine. That's fine. And yet I'm still losing friends. And that until you get to a certain point in life, you don't realize. And maybe it's a good thing because I am living my best life ever. But I am still so well aware that, gosh, watching my mother pass away in front of me, and this is my destiny in most likelihood, is a daunting kind of contemplation, if that makes any kind of sense.
I think
it is
does.
A daunting contemplation, and it's a contemplation, Mark, that has led a lot of people to religion. People are scared of death.
Yeah.
People fear it. People are scared of the unknown. People like me who aren't necessarily scared. I'm not bothered about dying as such, or death. I'm not bothered about death. I'm very concerned about the way in which I exit life.
Yeah,
I don't want to go in the same way that my father went. Suffering months of pain. Like everybody, I want to go to sleep surrounded by my loved ones, and that's it. But we have no control over that, unfortunately. And it's so hard to when you as you said, you get into the age where you're realizing things, and it's something I've thought about for a lot of time, because I've been involved with speaking to religious people for a lot of time, and I've contemplated death and dying. And it's very difficult when you to face that realization, and it is a scary prospect. And nobody can blame you for being scared about that. It's not irrational to be scared about that. When you're faced with mortality, it's perfectly reasonable to be scared about it and unsure about it. You have nothing but sympathy for you.
Yeah. Yeah, people.
That because
yeah.
I was just going to say, it's like you're 25, then you're 30, then you're 33, and it just feels like it's going to go on forever. And then all of a sudden you have this moment of clarity, and often it is triggered by the death of your parents. If you're lucky enough to still, be in touch and have family and such, and then you watch that it's just like, you don't just die one day. You go through this, it tears the dignity from you, the way that we die. And gosh, I don't regret, I see no evidence of, an afterlife or a God. And just sometimes I wonder, would I have said, no, thank you? And how that reflects on me, if that makes any kind of sense.
Yeah, it definitely makes sense. As human beings, I think it's natural for us to develop narratives about our lives that make sense in order for us to have meaning, right? So like religious stories give us this narrative that say, I truly believe when I was a Christian that God had given me the chance to fulfill a purpose, a God-given purpose to do the act of God. And when I stopped being a Christian, of course, I completely lost that. And that was a really hard thing for me to do. I thought God was going to give me a career. God was going to give me a wife. God was going to give me like this life, that he would treat me well as long as I followed his wants, his desires, as capricious as they were. As long as I followed them, I would be a good Christian boy, then that would come to me. And unfortunately, the reality of that seems to be suspect. It doesn't seem like that narrative holds weight when we look at it with any kind of scrutiny. So instead, what do I have to do? I have to find narratives that make sense to me, because it's hard for human beings to fully live out a life of nihilism. Like even Friedrich Nietzsche, who is often attributed to like establishing a philosophy of nihilism, had like value narratives that made sense to him as far as like what a superior human being should be like. They were awful, and I don't recommend anybody follow them, but at least he had a narrative that made sense and a goal, like a teleology to follow. For myself, it's hosting the show. Honestly, this show has given me so much life and so much purpose to doing stuff with the ACA, and of course I do lots of other things outside of this. This is one of several things I do, but like that's something that sustains me and helps me. And I hope if one day I do succumb to this story that you tell me about, Mark, about what my life is going to be, that I hope that maybe somebody could research my condition, whatever it is, and it can help people have less suffering at the end of their life, or maybe come to some sort of cure for something. There's a lot that we don't know about dementia. I don't know if it's something that can be cured, but it can be something that could probably be helped. So anyway, my encouragement, I guess, is to hopefully transform the things that you see in your life and figure out a narrative that makes the most sense for you. Not one that's irrational, not one that tells you lies, that says, oh, you're going to go to heaven after this, but one that can make you find a sense of comfort and peace in what you're doing. Because I think every human being deserves that, at least, in order for us to, live a life that we can work with, that makes sense to us, right? Anyway, I know I'm talking a lot of things here, Mark. I hope all that's been helpful for you.
No, I won't take up any more of your time, but your words reek of compassion, and
Mark,
you are to be lauded for it. And I thank you for your time.
Thank you, Mark.
Just before you go, Mark, I don't know if you can see the live chat. But if you can't see the live chat, I implore you to look back on the show afterwards and read the live chat, because there are links for secular support being put in there. And it may be worth having a look at those.
Oh, thank you. I will.
Yes, please do.
Have a good night, gentlemen.
Thank you, Mark. Have a great rest of your night. And that goes, of course, to anybody who is having contemplations of shedding this mortal coil. I mean, let's put it bluntly, right? Like, chances are, like, you don't have to feel that way. Chances are there are solutions to the problems that you might face. They might not be immediate. They might have to take time, and it might take a journey between friends and maybe a therapist and maybe whoever else is willing to help you get there. But there's a lot of people who have been through a lot of rough stuff in this community who would be happy to give you perspective and would be happy to show you some of those resources. Please check that out in the live chat. And you know what? Maybe, crew, if we could, maybe put some stuff in the description for this episode as well. It would be fantastic for that. But anyway, Richard, did you have anything else on that before we moved on?
Yeah, so it's a difficult period when you're going through, and we are social creatures. And it's good to have a support network, whether that's whatever that network is, whether it's family, friends, like you said, around you. We are social creatures, and we take comfort from each other.
Yes, definitely. You don't have to be alone, especially not now, where we have like the internet, where there's lots of cool people. There's a lot of shitty people. Don't get me wrong. But there's some cool people on there too. So anyway, let's get to. Man, we got. Don't know if we can get to both of these people, but I'm going to see what we can do. We're talking to. I think the name here is Biblical. Biblical from Australia. Are you live with us?
Yes. Hello. Thanks for my call.
Yeah, what's up? How can we help?
Biblically, there isn't a defeater that can supersede contra the attributive adjectives and adnouns of our biblical Christological God. What's thy feedback to R4 said brute fact?
I'll be honest with you, I didn't understand half of what you were talking about. If you could maybe repeat that in a way that would help me understand what you're trying to say, I'd appreciate that.
Biblically, our Christological God has always existed and Z cannot be destroyed. What's thy feedback to that brute fact?
Okay, I think you mostly said the same thing. You're saying God has always existed and can't be destroyed?
Biblically, I think is
Biblically,
the kind of
yes.
crux of it.
Okay. So God has always existed and he can't be destroyed.
Why do you think that?
Are you saying that's a claim about reality that you believe?
Biblically, that is a brute fact. That our biblical Christological God cannot be destroyed by an external particular. What's your response to that?
How do you know that this God is real?
Biblically, you have been using the proper noun God, so that requires divine revelation for an omnitude God to be intelligible within our finitudely cuspidated minds. So this ties us back to my earlier brute fact, is that our biblical Christological God cannot be destroyed.
I don't think it is a brute fact. I think I would disagree. I think I can make up all kinds of conceptions of God. Whether I believe him to be a brute fact or not is irrelevant to his actual existence or the method by which I come to know this God. In other words, you're saying that because of the language actually necessitates that this God exists, and I would disagree with that. I don't think it necessitates that.
Biblically, you refer to our biblical Christological God using the pronoun he, as he has made his unimpeachable attributive adjectives and predicative adjectives known to us at terminus a quo, which is a Latin term for the earliest starting point for our self-consciousness. So to reiterate the aforementioned brute fact that you haven't properly addressed with a yes or a no, is that our biblical Christological God doesn't have a defeater, therefore Z cannot be destroyed. What's that?
Well, the biblical God does have a defeater. The biblical God does have a defeater. Right, and the thing is, you need to demonstrate God. You can't just state he exists. You cannot just state that God exists. Allah exists. That defeats your God. Brahma exists.
Biblically,
that defeats your. I don't care about biblically. You've had your turn. Now I'm talking. You have to demonstrate it. You have to demonstrate it. What scholars are you using to make this statement? What experts in the field of biblical study are you using to demonstrate it? Because anybody can just say shit and say that, right, that's it, you're defeated. But that's not how real life works. It might work in your mind. It's not going to convince anybody else. So what we need to do is have a conversation here. We're here to have a conversation. We're not here for you to come and preach and say, right, biblically, God exists. No, bullshit. Biblically, God doesn't exist. Biblically, biblical scholars will tell you, Old Testament scholars will tell you that Yahweh was one of many gods who existed. And he put out the decree He put out the decree that he was to be the best of the gods and the only one worshipped, to be worshipped. Not that he was the only god. That's what the biblical scholars tell us about. I care more about what biblical scholars tell us than some man off the street coming and telling me biblically God exists, so therefore it's true. You need to give us a demonstration of why that's true. You can't just say it, because nobody cares that you're just saying it. Give us the evidence. Give us the scholarly evidence behind that statement.
Also, if we include the story of First Judges, God was defeated by chariots of iron. So I'm just gonna throw that out there. You can look that up.
Biblically, you have ontologically presupposed the divinity of our biblical Christological God within your starting premise.
Biblically, I'm going to drop this call because biblically, I'm getting tired of this conversation.
Yeah, I agree. Useless.
Look, like, who are you trying to convince here? Like, if your goal is, I want to make this person look stupid by just sticking to my argument and saying, well, he's not addressing it, therefore he doesn't know what he's talking about. We did address it. We reject the premise. Your premise was that God cannot be defeated. We rejected the premise that God even existed, and you didn't falsify that in any meaningful way. You just said, well, according to the Bible, he has to be, or use some other kind of. I'll be honest, I lost you with the language halfway through, because you're certainly not using it in the way philosophers use it. You're certainly not using it in the way in the most theologians use it, at least in any that I've talked to in recent years. So, and look, I talk about this stuff more than most people. So if I'm having trouble understanding you, how is the average person going to figure out what the heck you're talking about? Like, what are you going try? What is the goal? What are you trying to do? I don't know. But anyway, go look up that verse. I just found it too. It's Judges chapter 1, verse 19. Here's a new international version. The Lord was with the men of Judah. They took possession of the hill country, but they were unable to drive the people from the plains because they had chariots fitted with iron. So God was with them, but they couldn't do it because they had chariots of iron. And it doesn't make sense if we're talking about an omnipotent God, but it does make sense if we're talking about a local tribal deity that has interactions with the world and has these characteristics that you don't find with an omnipotent God, which is what biblical scholars and historians of the subject have told us about what Yahweh is, which is that he derives from a pantheism. But anyway, biblically, I'd love to see a response to that. Anyway, any other thoughts, Richard, before we get to this last one here?
I'm doing a degree in religion, philosophy, and ethics, and I read a lot of proper, real biblical scholars who actually do the study. A lot of my favorite biblical scholars are Christians. They're practicing religious people.
Yeah,
and they can separate the facts of the study of it from their faith, because they are professional people. They're not just people who come on the internet and say stuff. And that's a difference. There's a difference between a biblical scholar and an apologist or a presuppositionalist. And I don't care for a presuppositionalist. If you want, in your own little world, you can sit there and say that God exists, and that's fine for you. It's not going to convince anybody else at all.
You know, Richard, biblically, I think you're right. And biblically, we're going to take the next caller real quick. We don't have a lot of time, but I just want to see what we can get out of this conversation. Crew, please don't hate me. I want to see, because we do have this last caller here who's been waiting for a bit. Setuf, you are on the line. What is going on?
Hello.
Hello. How are you?
I'm good. How are you guys?
I'm good. We're at the tail end of the show, so we want to kind of keep up the pace a little bit. So let's get to it. What do you want to talk to us about?
Yeah, so I would like to know, from your perspective, when does a fetus become a sentient being?
It's a great question. I don't know. To be completely honest with you, I don't know. I've read a lot. I'm not going to say a lot. I haven't done as much research as I would say people who are really interested have done, to be honest with you. So I don't know what the criteria is. And I'm not. It may be the fact that the people who have studied this stuff the most may not have a demonstrated criteria that works the best. Yeah, there's a lot about this idea of sentience that we don't know the full parameters of. So if you were to ask me, to be completely honest with you, when it means for a fetus to become a human being, I don't know if I can tell you. Yeah. Richard, do you know?
Okay. No, I'm not a biologist.
Yeah.
I don't have an expertise in that field at all. I don't.
Yeah. If somebody does know, I'd love to have a conversation about it, but I genuinely don't. So hopefully that answers your question, Setuf. Do you have anything else?
Yeah, that does answer the initial question. Not directly because you don't know. I would rather have loved that you answered what you answered the other caller, which was at viability. You think?
Yeah. So I think it can, because like viability to me, Setuf, is like a pragmatic distinction, but it's not a completely bulletproof thing. Like I said before, I don't believe that it is. I think it works for like a lot of circumstances, but it doesn't cover everything, because we have seen people like fetuses who have lived outside the womb in what has traditionally been times where they couldn't have, and they've lived through that. So like viability has been questioned in recent years as a criteria and as a metric. So I don't have a good, complete, comprehensive, systematic thing where I can say this is when it's good and this is when it's bad. I'll leave it up to people who really know what they're talking about to do that, but I simply don't know at this time.
Okay, but you would agree that at some point during the pregnancy, the fetus becomes a sentient being deserving of moral consideration?
Yes, I do. Do you think that, Richard?
It depends what you mean by sentience. The sentience is not always a well-defined term. If you mean, is it a being that's capable of life on its own? Yeah, that's that. I accept that. And then you talk. If you're using that as an argument, then you can say, well, under those circumstances, we should all be vegan because sentient beings are alive and we shouldn't kill them. If that's the argument, if some people use sentience as to mean self-conscious or self-consciously aware, and in that case, that doesn't apply to the human even after it's been born for a while. So this is a wide-ranging subject, which needs a lot more time than we've got here, I think, to discuss fully.
But if we're talking about, like a baby the day before it's born, should it have moral consideration? Like, yes, I do. But I couldn't tell you exactly where that line is drawn. I really couldn't. Not at this time, anyway.
Yeah, cool. So thanks, guys, for the nice conversation. I don't want to take too much of your time. So thank you.
Okay, thank you, Setuf. And there we go. We talked at the very beginning. Well, I did. I monologued while you were gone for a bit, Richard, about this idea of saying when we can say when we don't know something. I think it's important. Maybe there's going to be people in the comment section that's going to say, "Oh, well, Dan, duh, you should have said X, Y, and Z. You should know about this. That's cool. I hope to learn more from you. I've certainly learned a lot from this community. I've certainly never been perfect in some of my responses. I've definitely changed my thoughts on things, even since I've started hosting, which is fantastic. And I still consider at least questions about when a human being is a human being an open question. And that is my opinion on it. But that doesn't necessarily mean that I think that abortion should be completely off the table until we kind of figured this question out. I don't think that's realistic. I don't think that's safe. And I don't think that's healthy for all parties involved. But, that's all she wrote. That's all I got to say on that. And with that, we are going to be wrapping up this call. I'm not going to be in the after show today, but Richard is going to be in the after show today. So check it out. He's going to be on the fan run Discord server, which we'll have a link to in the description. So you should definitely check that out. But Richard, if people want to find you, where should they go?
Oh, I'm all over the shop. I really am. I sometimes appear on the Perspective on Ethan Michael's network. I'm doing something for International Freethinkers, which is a monthly secular parenting show. We have a podcast called Skeptic Hangout. You can find me on Skeptic Takeout. You can always find me on the ACA fan run Facebook groups. I'm always there. I'm adminning, and there's like 7 or 8 different groups. So there's a little flavor for everybody. I highly recommend the Truth Wanted fan group. Get yourself in there. So yeah, you'll always find me on the non-profits. I'm a regular host on there. And yeah, just come and say hello and let's have a conversation. That's what I'm here for.
Hell yeah. Richard is a cool guy. You guys should definitely go talk to him if you're considering it. So I want to tell you guys a couple different ways you can help continue to support this show. One of them is something I mentioned earlier, which is that Patreon. Again, none of the hosts personally, financially profit from any of those donations. It all goes towards making these shows better. So thank you to everybody who donates on patreon.com/truthwanted. And I try to give you a shout out every week to all of those patrons who help us out. Another way to support us is through our merch. We got that merch store, baby, with all of the Truth Wanted swag. And listen, all right? Listen, don't tell the crew I said this, but the Truth Wanted stuff, all right, it's better than the other stuff. And I don't even mean like in terms of quality. I just mean it's better. Like there's like a phenomenological aspect about this stuff that's just intangible, that you just know when you're walking in with that Truth Wanted hoodie, like you're kind of cool. Like you're that person. So anyway, check that stuff out if you are interested. This show is a part of the AEN Podcast Network, which includes a bunch of different shows, all produced by the atheist community of Austin. We got Atheist Experience, we got Talk Heathen, we got Nonprofit, Secular Sexuality, all kinds of programs for you to enjoy. So you should definitely check that out. Link to that's going to be in the description, so you can see all of those shows. And this show is available on iTunes, Spotify, and YouTube, wherever you might get your podcast. So please like, subscribe, leave a review. Anything that helps us get the show out there is super appreciated. And check out this show live if you're listening to this at a later time. It's always live Fridays at 7 p.m. Central. We'd love to talk with you. You can contact me. It's truth@atheist-community.com to do that. Or you can follow me on Twitter at ObjectivelyDan. And lastly, I just want to point out another way you can support the show is to click that join button, and you can become a member on YouTube. It's really, really cool. You get cool little emoticons for that, and ones with my faces on them, which is neat and very fun. So check that out if you haven't already. And if you want to join the community, ones that maybe Richard might be familiar with, there is a fan-run Facebook group for Truth Wanted that you should check out if you haven't already. Continue the discussion on that page, and you'll meet tons of people who will want to talk to you about all kinds of stuff: cryogenics, probably abortion, probably all kinds of things, anything to your heart's content. It's probably on that platform. So we are about to close things out for the night. But Richard, do you have any words of wisdom you want to share before we go?
I never have words of wisdom. No, just practice skepticism. It's not a dirty word. A lot of people look at it as a dirty word, and it's not a dirty word. It's just, we all need it, whether we think we're skeptical or atheists or critical thinkers. We need it. It's not just the religious people and the people who believe in UFOs and ghosts and things who need skepticism. We all need skepticism. We all have bad brains that don't work tremendously in that area. So we're all prone to it. Just accept it and practice it a little bit.
I love that. That's some great words of wisdom. I'm Objectively Dan. We all have bad brains that don't work. Remember to always keep wanting the truth. Almost forgot. I cannot believe I almost forgot. Hold on. We got to stop everything because we got to go straight to the crew cam. The crew is what helps make the show happen every single week. And here I was pontificating at the beginning of the show, talking about how awesome the crew was, and I almost forgot to do the fucking crew cam. Wow. Wow, I'm going to get hell for that later. I'm going to get fucking roasted. Holy shit. God damn. Anyway, we got to thank that crew. Thank you guys for everything that you do. Seriously, you guys rock. And remember to always keep wanting the truth. And I'll see you next time.
Watch the nonprofits and join the hosts in the live chat, Sundays at 3 p.m. Central between The Atheist Experience and Talk Heathen. Visit tiny.cc/YTNP.